I did a video today talking about the Giants' biggest mistake this offseason. And obviously, people point to Saquon, they point to McKinney, they point to the way they had. Well, Daniel Jones wasn't really an offseason thing, but me, it was the Hard Knocks thing. I think Hard Knocks was a big mistake in hindsight. When I first watched it, I said, I like it. I think that's pretty cool. But then you look at the way it played out, and it was terrible. Was it a mistake for them to go on Hard Knocks? What did you think about that? How bad, I should say this, how bad does it make Joe Shane look in your eyes? That whole Hard Knocks thing now, seeing the way everything is played out this year.
I think it doesn't look great for Joe. I will say that. But they were going to have to do it at some point, and I think that the off season was probably better than them doing it during the season, unless they do what they're doing with the AFC North now, where they're doing all the teams. Then maybe it would have been different. I don't think it looks great, obviously, but I feel like they were going to have to do it at some point anyway, that maybe I would have preferred the offseason. I think maybe what they probably should have done is focus less on showing us about the draft and free agency and showed more about what they were going to do for the 100th season of the Giants, because then that way they could have geared towards, making the organization look good and say, we're celebrating 100 years and we're doing all these things to give back to the fans and, that type of thing, instead of which is tough. And the fans, I don't really care about that. I want to see the behind the scenes. I want to see what the board looks like. I want to see what the draft process is like. But I'm also you have to be prepared that, obviously no one thought this season was going to go like that. But I think it's hard to look back and be like, yeah, it was a great idea that they did this.
So, I've heard people say that the Giants, teams are forced to do this. The Giants have never done this. They've always turned it down. So why are they forced to do it? They have some kind. I don't know, because I've never watched Hard Knocks until this year, only because the Giants were in it. Are teams contracted to do that?
Yeah.
I think so.
They are. Okay.
Yeah.
I did not.
It has to do with how recently they made the postseason. If you haven't made the postseason X amount of years or something, then there's a list of teams.
Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's a rookie quarterback too. You don't have to do it if you have a rookie, something with that.
Not rookie quarterback, it's rookie head coach. If you have a rookie head coach, you don't have to do it. So there's a couple rules, but if you don't have any of those stipulations, then they pick one of those teams that are on the list that are available, and you have to do it. You just don't even have a choice.
I did not know.
I think the Giants had the choice of in season or off season, and they chose off season. So that was their way of being nice to the Giants, because the Giants didn't want to do it. They gave them that choice, but they had to do one of the two.
I'm gonna tell you what. I'm gonna tell you what, guys. And I was always a big proponent of not wanting the Giants to go on Hard Knocks ever, because I just think it's an unnecessary distraction. As a fan, it's great, right? You get some inside access. You get to see your team. You get more content before the season. You get amped up before the season starts. But as a fan thinking about the wellness of the team, I've always been a big anti-Hard Knocks guy. I enjoyed the content, no doubt about it, when I got to watch it. But now getting to see how it played out, I think it would have been better off being the traditional Hard Knocks than getting to see the inner workings of the offseason for the New York Giants, getting to see the GM talk about the players on the team and some players that he likes and some players that he doesn't. And to your point, Adriana, as a Giants fan, it would have been better for them to talk about, like you said, preparing for the 100th season. But when that show is not just for Giants fans, it's for broad NFL fans. So, when you go on there, they're catering to all 32 NFL teams' fan bases. They want to see the inner workings of the draft and the offseason progress. So getting to see how it transpired, I think it was an awful decision for the Giants to sign up for that, because there's nothing good that can come from it. Zero good can come from that show, because it's kind of like getting to see how the hot dogs are made. I just like hot dogs. I don't want to see how the hot dogs are made. And there's only negative things that could come out of that. And, you think about it from the perspective of Daniel Jones, of course, going into the offseason that the Giants are going to explore quarterbacks. Daniel Jones knows that. But Daniel Jones watching how they were fawning over Jayden Daniels and watching how they were fawning over these quarterback prospects, that doesn't put him in the right set of mind before the season starts. And you can say that about several players on the team. I'm sure Saquon Barkley didn't like the way that he was portrayed on the show. I think there was nothing good that could come out of it. And yeah, I think it was a massive mistake by the New York Giants to choose to go on the offseason Hard Knocks. If they could do it all over again, I think they would have went for more of the traditional route, and letting fans get to see how training camp works out rather than getting to see how the general manager portrays his players. I don't think the Giants will ever go on that portion of Hard Knocks ever again.
Anthony, how do you think it makes Joe Shane look in hindsight now that, you've seen Barkley's at the season end today? I think Barkley's MVP. McKinney is leading the league in interceptions, was tied the last time I checked. Obviously, those are two big players here, and they decided not to go that route. So how do you think it made Joe Shane look overall?
I think McKinney is an interesting one to point to because he felt like a footnote in the entire Hard Knocks series. Like, he was barely mentioned. They didn't show those negotiations. They really just showed Saquon Barkley. And I think the way that it played to me was like Joe Shane didn't even prioritize bringing back McKinney at all. Looked like they didn't even care to. And I think that makes him look way worse than even the Saquon thing, because at least they put some effort in, and that was demonstrated in the show. But the fact that they basically they didn't show the Giants making any sort of offers to McKinney, I think that's pretty embarrassing in and of itself now that he's Defensive Player of the Year, or at least a very strong candidate for that award. I will say, though, I guess to play a little bit of devil's advocate, I think there are some positive spins that you can take away from Hard Knocks. For one, the Giants at least were realistic with themselves and with their roster. They knew that they needed to move on from Daniel Jones, and at least they tried. You can point to that and say Joe Shane didn't buy into the fool's gold. Like, he tried his best to get that quarterback. It just didn't work out for him. And then another positive light that I would shine is Brandon Brown and some of the other guys who were in that front office looked great. And that's going to help Brandon Brown get a general manager job, whether it's with the Giants or somebody else down the line. So I think there were positives that came away from it. It's very easy to point towards all the negatives because there was a lot of negative, and Joe Shane didn't necessarily look great throughout that whole process, but there were some positives. And I think that there was a lot of attention paid to the scout team that the Giants have, and there were some really impressive talents, or at least they exhibited impressive talents in the
15-second clips you get to see of them. Yeah, but
well, they did some interviews with some of them.
They did. Yeah,
I'm trying to remember names, and I can't remember their names, and that's why I feel bad, because I'm like highlighting these people did great work and looked great on the show, and I don't remember their names. So that's kind of
a long year,
not a good look for me. But
it did seem like they have a functional group where I feel like if they had done this during Dave Gettleman's era, it would have been a disaster. Where I feel like now, even though, like Anthony said, like there were some good things that came out of it, that we see that there's function, there's teamwork, camaraderie. Like, I feel like the scouts and some of the people like Brandon Brown that are in the positions that they're in, like, I have some faith in those people versus being like, oh my God, everyone who works in these positions is an idiot.
Yeah. And I'll say they made their college scouting team look very good because they focused a lot on the draft. But what about their pro scouts? That was something that I felt like they didn't show enough of. Like, they showed the general manager, Joe Shane. I guess he's the star of the show, basically. But there's other guys in the building who have a lot to do with internal scouting and scouting across the NFL. Director of pro scouting, I feel like, was barely involved. Tim McDonald was barely featured in the show. That's some stuff that maybe they really didn't want to show because of the way things have played out. I think that, that's the real problem with the New York Giants. I think their college scouting looks pretty good this year. The rookie class is tremendous, but their internal scouting clearly is not good. And so they're probably lucky that they didn't show more of that process on the show, because then they would look even worse than they do right now.
Yeah. No, one other thing I like, though, and again, people don't like the fact that they let Barkley walk. I think obviously him having to if he would have got hurt this year, like if he would put up a year that he put up here, I don't think anybody would bat an eye at it, honestly. The fact that he's having a career season makes it look worse. But also, one thing I like that they did address it, like you said, Anthony, they understood what they needed to do. And you heard Joe Shane say a number of times, Pat Mahomes didn't survive behind her. Let me give 85 sacks. We have to improve the offensive line. And unfortunately for the Giants, they couldn't afford to pay McKinney. They couldn't afford to pay Barkley and improve the offensive line. And until Andrew Thomas went down, I'm not saying the offensive line was great, but it was way better.
It was passable.
Better, right? It was passable. When he went down, the offense went down with it. So
I get what you guys are saying, but as a fan, I just feel like the cons far outweigh the pros that could come out of something like that. Like, I feel like things from that potentially could divide a locker room. Like when you see how Joe Shane values certain players over others, I don't know. I just think it's something we don't need to see as fans. Personally, I would enjoy it if I got to see the Colts do it. I don't want to see the Giants do it again.